Hi, I'm Lisa Rubel from Love to Color My World, and I'm here today to talk to you about Dresden quilt blocks. If you look at a Dresden quilt block like this here, you can see it's got a round shape. It's made out of wedges. Sometimes it has a covering in the center, and a lot of times it's appliqued onto a block. Well, the version I'm going to show you today can be used to make a tree skirt, which is a fun way to decorate for the holidays. I'm going to be using this pattern that comes from Sit and Sew Fabrics. I have the Moose Lodge tree skirt, which comes with pre-cut pieces. And for making Dresden plates, having pre-cut pieces takes away half of the battle because they have curved edges at the bottom and at the top. And then even these edges are angles. So if you're cutting them on your own, you're going to be doing either with your rotary cutter or scissors doing some curved piecing. But this kit comes with all of the wedges already cut, and all you have to do is sew them together and add the backing. The kit also comes with backing fabric, so you've got everything you need right there. And I'll walk you through the steps so you can put one together yourself. So the first thing we're going to do is to plan out placement of your wedges. Now this particular kit comes with 16 wedges, 2 of each print, so you can come up with a pattern and then just make it twice. Here are the fabrics that I'm going to be working with today to sew my tree skirt together. To get started, I'm going to take my first 2 wedges and I'm going to lay them right sides together, matching up this long angled edge. Now because these edges are angled, they're cut a little bit off of the straight of grain, you're going to want to pin them together so that they don't stretch while you're sewing. So put some pins in along this edge, and then I'm going to sew starting at the inner edge and sew all the way out to the wider edge with a 1/4 inch seam. Because we are working with curves and with the stretch, you should backstitch at the beginning and the end. It will ultimately be covered up, but it will just keep your tree skirt a little tighter and more protected as we assemble the skirt. After you've stitched the first 2 wedges together, you want to press the seam to one side. You can press towards the darker fabric. And give it a good press so it stays nice and flat. And now you've got 1/8 of your tree skirt assembled. Now we're going to join the wedges together in pairs, so you'll have 8 pairs, and then join those pairs together to make the 4 quarters. By doing it that way, you can measure as you go along, and at the point that you have 4 quarters, we can make sure that everything is straight so you end up with a nice circle for your tree skirt. So go ahead and sew the other wedges together so that you end up with your 8 pairs, and then join those pairs into the quarters so that you've got 4 quadrants, and then we'll move on. So I've got my 4 quadrants sewn together now. You can see they have that nice detail of that scalloped edge along the bottom, which will just give a little extra flair to the finished skirt. And each quadrant is made up of 4 wedges that are sewn together. And the reason that we sew the tree skirt together in pairs and then in quarters and then in halves is just for control, quality control. So what you can do when you've got 4 stitched together is pull out a square ruler and just double check and make sure. It's funny because it doesn't really look like it would be a 90-degree angle, but if I put my ruler on this, my ruler lines up with the raw edges of my outer wedge, and I can see that I've got a 1/4 circle here. I've got 90 degrees worth of wedges right here. So I know that I'm on track to have a full circle when I'm done. If yours is not quite 90 degrees, if it's a little more, a little less, because we are making a tree skirt here, you're okay because we won't actually be joining the full circle together. We'll be leaving one opening between two of the wedges so that you can take the skirt on and off of the tree. So we've got a little extra leeway there. So if yours is not perfect, don't worry about it. If it's very off, you may want to check some of your seams to see if they are 1/4 inch and see how well you're doing staying near the edge of the wedge. So now that we have the quadrants done, it's time to join those together to make halves. So we'll be joining 2 quadrants into a half and the other 2 quadrants into a half, and then joining those 2 halves just along one seam. So what we'll end up with is a large circle, but not sewn together at the ends, because that's where we'll put it around the tree. This project's getting big. So now I've got my 4 quadrants sewn together. You can see it's open at one end. If we were making a Dresden plate that was not a tree skirt, we would sew that edge together and make it into a ring. However, we do need that edge for the tree skirt. The next step is to sandwich our backing, our batting, and our tree skirt top. Now you're going to want to find a big flat space for this because it takes up a lot of room. You're going to first lay down a 58-inch square piece of batting. And if you want to skip the batting and have a thinner tree skirt, you can absolutely do that too. With the pillowcase finish that we're going to do, that would work just fine. Your tree skirt just won't have quite as much body to it, but it's absolutely an option. So if you're going to use batting, lay down your batting square in your large open space, and then spread out your backing square right side up. So the wrong side of your backing will be on top of your batting. And then you're going to take the tree skirt and you're going to lay it right side down, so you've got your right sides together of the tree skirt front and back on your square of backing fabric. And I'm just demoing a little part of it here because my workspace is not quite big enough to show that. But start in the center of your tree skirt and get it laid out so that that center circle is spread out to its full shape. So your unstitched sections should touch each other right the whole way down, and you want to get this circle as flat as you possibly can. So the backing will be showing through in the center. And when you have this circle spread out and flat, you can put pins in to hold it in place around this center circle. This is a time when pinning heavily is a really good idea. You don't want your open wedge spot, you do not want that to overlap because we will ultimately need to cut through there. So you want them close, but not quite overlapping because we'll ultimately cut that. So get that center pinned, pin down those open wedges, and from there work out in all directions. Spread the tree skirt out, get the wedges all spread out as without wrinkles and as flat as you can get them, and then pin around the outer edge. To make the tie for the tree skirt, we're going to use the 3-inch by width of fabric strip that was included in the kit. We're going to start out by cutting this into 4 equal pieces, then we'll fold, press, and add it to your tree skirt. So for each tie, come over to your iron and press the strip in half lengthwise. Then open it back up and press each edge into the center. And after you have that done, then you're going to refold it on that center line. There we go, and we've got a tie that has finished edges on both sides. What you can then do before you go to stitch it is go to one end and just fold it in about 1/4 inch so that we get rid of the raw edges. The other end will be inside our tree skirt, so that won't matter. If you are using ribbon, you can stitch over on one end or tie a knot or something to keep it from fraying. And then what you want to do is to top stitch along 3 sides of your tie. down both long ends and then that little bit at the end. So I've got my tree skirt all pinned. I've got my quilt sandwich of my tree skirt top, the backing, and then underneath that my batting. I've got it pinned around the outer edge, the center circle, and down through my open wedges. And now before I stitch it, I'm going to add in the ties for the skirt. So what I'm going to do is measure down about 3 inches from the end here, and I'm actually going to take this pin out to put it in. Tuck my tie between the tree skirt front and the backing, and match the raw edges of the tie to the tree skirt and pin it in place. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to measure down about 3 inches again. You want to make sure the rest of the tie is tucked inside so it doesn't actually accidentally get stitched when you're adding on, when you're stitching the tree skirt together, but all you want to be able to stitch is this little end of the tie. So I'm going to do the one on that side, and then I'm going to do the same thing up closer to the middle. I'm going to go about 3 inches down from that center circle and get that tie tucked in as well. And when you are stitching around the quilt, you may want to double stitch in that section. When we top stitch around, we'll also stitch over it again, but as you're stitching, it wouldn't hurt to put an extra layer of stitches in there as well, just to help hold it. I'm going to put this last one in about 3 inches from the top and pin it to hold it in place. Get the end tucked in as well. Okay, so now that I have my ties in place, I'm going to go over to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down this side of the wedge, and then work my way around the scallops on the bottom all the way around, and then I'll be coming up this other wedge and then work my way around the center circle 1/4 inch from the edge as well. And don't forget, when you are sewing down one of these 2 long wedge edges, you want to leave a 10 or 12 inch opening for turning the tree skirt. So make sure you leave that opening without stitching so that you can flip it inside out or right side out when we're done stitching. Now that I'm done sewing my 3 layers together, it's time to cut the backing to the size of the front of the tree skirt. I'm going to start out by cutting up the gap between the 2 wedges. And you want to make sure your tree skirt is spread out so you don't worry about cutting through another part of it, because that would be really sad at this point. And then when you get to the center, you're going to just follow the raw edges of the tree skirt around in a circle until you have that full center cut out. And then after that is complete, and obviously you'll want to keep cutting around the whole outside again, cutting outside edge, cutting in line with all of those scallops. But what you'll want to do for the turning, because these are curved, is you'll want to clip the curves, particularly the ones that curve in, like the whole center. Make sure that you don't hit your seam, but if you do these clips when you turn it inside out, turn it right side out, it will lay much flatter. So I've clipped the edges all the way around the inside and outer edges of my tree skirt and turned it right side out. The next thing I'm going to do is take my seam creaser or some kind of tool like this to help push out the edges, especially along those scallops. So what I like to do is go in with one hand and push along that seam edge to get it as sharp as possible, and then follow up with the iron. And you're going to need to do this all the way around the quilt, so it's all the way around the tree skirt. So at some point you're going to be wearing probably the entire tree skirt on your arm if you like to do it from the inside like I do. You can also do it up around the inner circle of the skirt as well. Do the same thing. Push the seam out to get it as sharp as possible and then press it. And then your next step will be to press the raw edges from your opening under so that you end up with an edge that you can stitch here, and then top stitch all the way around the outside of the quilt. That will help hold the seam in place and keep a nice sharp edge. This would also be the time that you could do any other quilting that you wanted to do. So here's a quick look at my finished tree skirt. I've got it all assembled and quilted, and you can see I quilted around each of the wedges, just about 1/4 inch from the seam allowance, and then I backstitched at the beginning and end of each of those quilting lines. And then here are my ties, which are secured within the edges of these open wedges. And so when I go to put the skirt around the tree, I can tie these together, and that will keep it in the circle shape around the tree. I hope you enjoyed making this tree skirt and that it makes your tree even more beautiful this holiday season.